Hello everyone. Today I will be going over lesson 1 in our Java class, which is variables, data types, and printing. What is Java? Java is the most popular coding language in the world. It is easy to use and it's used for apps or coding applications on phones and on websites, games, database connection, and so much more. So now let's move on to syntax. So syntax is how to tell the computer what to do in a programming language, such as Java. So syntax in coding languages is basically the same as grammar in English. So we need to use specific commands, characters, etc. to get the computer to do what we want them to do. And computers are really picky, so you must be very precise with what you tell them to do. And every statement in Java needs a semicolon, like a period. We'll be talking more about this later. So variables. Every programming language uses variables. Variables are containers for storing values, so for storing data values. And you can store basically anything you want in a variable. These variables are useful for capturing and accessing that value whenever and how much you want in your code. So what exactly can we store in a variable, right? So to answer that question, we have to move on to data types. Data types are different types of data that exist in coding, which can be stored in variables and manipulated and captured from users. Data types can be used to perform operations as well. There are 5 different data types in Java, which are strings, characters, which are called chars, integers, which are called ints, floats, and booleans. Strings are letters, numbers, symbols, and basically anything you want. And everything that you put in a string must be in quotation marks, or a computer wouldn't recognize that this is a string. For example, if you see here, hello world is a string because it is inside quotation marks. So chars are single characters, but these can be any symbol you want. For example, and they're not used very often. So for example, this $sign, this 3, and a B are chars because they're in single quotation marks, which is the syntax for chars. Ints are whole numbers, and there isn't a specific syntax rule like there was for chars and strings to make sure that that number is an integer. For example, you can just type in, for example, it's just 5 or 2 or -5, so there isn't a special rule for them. And floats are just decimals, and it's the same thing as integers, that there is no special syntax rules. For example, it's 5.345 or 12.1 or basically any decimal. So let's move on to Booleans. Booleans can either be true or false, and these are the only possible values for Booleans. They don't have any special syntax as well, just make sure that they're all completely lowercase. So these are used mainly so that special sections of codes are run when special things happen. I will be going over this more in detail in a later video. Okay, so now let's move on to actually making variables. So to do that, we have to specify what data type they're going to store. And you can also call the variable whatever you want. And this is the syntax. So first you will tell it, say the data type, and then you will say the variable name, and then you will put an equal sign so that it will assign it to this particular value. And then at the end, of course, there will be a semicolon. So for example, this is how you would create a variable num that's an integer, and the value for it would be 5. So let's practice this a bit in Java. So I'm going to go to REPL and I'm going to make a new REPL Java, and I'm going to say so let's try another variable. Let's make a string variable. So to that, I would write string, and then I'm just going to call this I'm just going to call this name, and then I'm going to assign it to a string. So now remember that string has to have quotation marks. I'm going to do quotation marks, and then I'm going to put inside this. And then I'm going to put a semicolon here. So that's how you make a string variable. Let's try another one. Let's try an integer variable. So in Java, it does not go by integer, it goes by int. So I would do int. I would do, let's say, int. And then I'm going to set it equal to 15. And since it is an integer, it does not need any special things around it. And I'm just going to do semicolon. So that's how you make variables. So now let's go, and also for integers, you can also send integer variables to an expression that's an integer. For example, I can say int and you might ask, why can I do this? Well, I can do this because this equals 5, right? 2 plus 3 equals 5, which is also an integer. If I did something like I do, this wouldn't work because this isn't an integer. 1 divided by 2 gives us 0.5, which is a decimal. So a better thing to do here would to make this a float. And floats work because floats are for decimal numbers. Now, and also you might ask, why are these squiggly lines? It's just because I have not used these variables yet. And we'll fix that in the next section, which is printing. So printing is just having the computer print a specific phrase that you want into the screen. Now the syntax for having this done is just to write system.out.print. And so if you see in here, there's this thing that says public static void main, has this sort of, there's a bunch of text here, and there's these brackets. So not only for printing, you have to make sure that all your print statements are inside these brackets. So if you do it, so if you write, it wouldn't work. So if you write this outside, it wouldn't work and the computer wouldn't run it. The computer only runs everything that's inside this. So let's now print some stuff. So I just have to do. And another thing to note with print statements is that you can only print strings inside the print statement. So everything has to be a string. So why don't we start out with doing let's start with printing out and if you want to print it out on a separate line, then you would write So this specifies that this is going to be a separate line, the ln at the end, and I'm just going to write here. Let's see if this runs. Oh, what do you think the error is here? Does anybody know? Yeah, it's, why don't you think about this for a few seconds and then pause this video and then come back when you think you figured it out. Okay, so the error, if you see here, it says this is expected. So if you see here, I forgot to put semicolons, so I'm just gonna do that. And let's see if it works now. Yeah, see, it worked. It printed out, hello, my name is Bliss. And since I didn't specify that this is going to be a separate line, it just printed this out here, just right there. So if I want to fix that, I can just do, yeah, I just print, if you're wondering what this hello world is, it's just printing out this top one as well. So now we've printed out these expressions. Did you know that you can also print out variables too? So if I want to print out this variable name, all I have to do is just do this. I'm just gonna go number right. Yeah, so if you see here, it prints out Bliss at the end. So what if I wanted, so now let's print out some integers. So how would we print out, I'm just gonna get rid of this, we don't really need this anymore. How are we gonna print out some integer variables? So that's gonna be simple as well, you just do this. So that's how you print out the variable age. You're wondering, well, you did say that only strings can be printed, right? So how did it print out this integer variable? Well, this is because that's the only thing that's in this print argument. It's only this integer. And so the computer is smart enough to understand to convert this into a string and then print it out. If we had printed out, for example, if he had print out this integer with a string, it wouldn't have worked. But since it's only this one single variable that's an integer, it's smart enough to understand what to do. So now I think that we have this clear. Why don't we move on to Booleans? So to make a Boolean, you're just gonna go and so with this, the only other thing it can be is false. So to do that, so it could also be just false. That's it. So let's print out a Boolean. So let's print out this Boolean, which is true. And we're just going to go here. So what do you think this is going to print? It should print false, but let's see. Yep, it printed out false. Great. So that's basically how to make and print out variables. So now I want to talk about one more thing, which is comments. Comments are basically instructions and stuff for humans, not computers. And computers ignores these comments in your code. So then what are these comments for? Well, they're just to explain different parts of your code. For example, and to do this, syntax, you would just add these two slash marks before each comment. So that's sort of how it should be. So in my code, for example, if I do and I run it, see, it just completely ignores this because I've specified that this is a comment. So this is a really good way to organize your code and to make it understandable to other people, because you might want to share this code with other people. So you should get into the habit of commenting your code and explaining what different parts of your code does. So for example, I might say, so these comments, they are explaining these two pieces of my code so that other people know what I'm doing. And so that I also know what I'm doing if I go back to this after some time and I might forget. So this is basically all that I have for you today. So just to recap, we learned what Java is and why it's useful. We learned different data types, what variables are, and we learned how to create these variables and print them out, and then we learned how to do comments. Okay, so the coding challenge or assignment for this week is to print out different variables. So how to access this assignment? Well, I will show you. So what we will do is we're going to go to home, hit new REPL. We're going to go import to GitHub, and then you're going to copy paste this link. Wait, let me make sure it works. Yes, so I'm going to go here. I'm going to go copy paste this link. The same from GitHub. Okay, so now we have to configure the run button because the code right now does not know which language this is in. So we have to tell it. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say this is in Java. And then we're just going to have to enter the command Java. And then you just have to type in Java, and then you have to type in the name of the file, which is lesson 1 assignment.java. Then we're going to hit done. So this on the right is just saving that this language is Java, and this file is what we're going to be running. So we're going to go here. And so over here, you're just going to be printing out different variables. Like you're going to be printing out a string variable, and this space is for you to write the code to print it out. You're going to be making this expression, and I want you to change this expression to anything you like. For example, like 7 times 3 or 2 plus 1. And then you're going to print it out here. And then you're going to do the same thing with the Boolean variable. So this is my example. So I'm printing out an integer, which is going to be 5 times 2. And this is the code we're actually printed out. So let's see if this works. I'm gonna hit run. Yeah, sometimes just note that it might take some time. And you also might have to hit enter for some reason to get it to run. So now this at the bottom are just some tips, and debugging is just meaning to figure out errors and correct them. That's what debugging means. So some debugging tips are, if it doesn't work, if you see a red squiggly, and I will show you how a red squiggly looks like. For example, if I do this, and this red squiggly, it means that there's an issue here, right? So it cannot be resolved to a variable. And this is because we're not specifying what data type we're using. So to fix it, we're just going to say int, and see these red squigglies should go away. And then you want to also make sure that every single statement you have has a semicolon. And another tip is to make sure that everything is spelled and capitalized correctly. In Java, and just to be sure, Java is very picky about this. For example, if I capitalize the I, it doesn't work. It's not going to work. Yeah, see, there's an error here because it's not working. So if I do this, let's see, and we run it again, yeah, it's working. It's saying it's loading, so I think it's just some issue in my computer, but it should work completely fine on yours, just to make sure that this is the correct way to do it. And so, and also, if you still can't figure it out, don't worry, you can always email me or message anyone on Hangouts, and we'll also have a Q&A session where we're going to introduce your mentors, and then you can always resolve your issue there. That's what the Q&A session is for. So now let's talk about how to submit the assignment. So first of all, I want you to add your name in a comment somewhere. Like for example here, just say name so that I know who you are. And then all you're gonna do is you're gonna click this button here that says invite. And then you should just enter in my username or my email. So you can either enter tech for girls or the email techmastergirls@gmail.com. And don't worry if it says that no person is found. I don't know why it does that. It's still able to find me, and then you want to hit invite. For me, it's not working because I can't invite myself, but for you guys, it should work just fine. And you can also hit here and you can just copy this link and just email it to me. Please just email this link to me, and that should work fine as well. So that is, and to make sure that you submit this by Thursday, so that you are in, so that it's submitted by Friday when we have our Q&A session. And that is it for today's lesson. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you had fun, and goodbye.